Welcome. Thank you for finding your way. This is a place for anyone who needs a moment of solace. A place to just listen, relax, and let your world slow down. Settle in with me as we continue our journey through Pale Light's Book 1, Lost Things by ErraticErrata. Chapter 22. Tristan began fiddling with his cabinet like there was a point to it, keeping his hands occupied so he wouldn't have to think about what he had just walked away from. When he saw her approaching from the corner of his eye, it was almost a relief. Gol was the shortest of all the trial takers, barely 5'5" by his guess, and though she was full-bodied, the thief could tell it was not the result of idleness. There was muscle to her frame, and calluses on her palms. Same kind Guardia sometimes got. Those that come from shooting regularly. Her black hair was long, kept in a braid going down her back. She had a gold ring in her nose. The vivid shades of her clothes spoke of coin, even for a Ramayan, a people whose love of color was proverbial. A green kurta, the colorless tunic in the Someshwar ended above her knees, leading into striped trousers in white and yellow, were tucked into high boots. A blood-red sash at her waist had 2 pistols tucked into, while a leather bandolier holding powder horns hung loose across her torso, connecting a shoulder to the opposite side. Shalini had the look of a soldier, but did not hold herself like one, which spoke to Tristan of someone who had been trained, not taken, to such a life. And while he'd been studying her, he realized she had been studying him right back. Tristan, is it? He smiled. I don't believe we have been properly introduced. She had an easy smile, he decided, but it was not false. Shalini Gol struck him instead as one of those strange people Vesper had blessed with a general enjoyment of life. It must make her easy to like. It felt like a long journey here, but it ended up being so little time, hasn't it? Tristan smiled back, entirely practiced. She offered her hand to shake, which he did. Her grip was firm. I am Shalini Gol, he said, then shrugged at her raised eyebrow. Word gets around. I suppose it does, he chuckled. And you even pronounced it right. Do you... Shalini said something he did not understand in what he was pretty sure was Samatrava, the most common of the Someshwari languages. Tristan answered with the only sentence in that language he had ever learned. The brothels are down the canal with red lanterns, he informed her. A flicker of complete and utter surprise, then Shalini burst out laughing. It was contagious enough that he found himself smiling as she slapped her knee, holding her stomach. Oh, gods, the Ramayan wheezed. I guess that's an answer. How much did they pay you to tell the sailors? Only 3 radishes a night, but it came with a meal, Tristan said. He saw her pause, count in her head as she translated from the currency Sacramonte and most of Trebian Sea used coinage she better knew. The Imperial Someshwar had a few, but Jala, Seshajala, in truth, but not even the Someshwari used the full name. were the only one he'd ever seen used at the docks. Private currencies of the Rajas were barely accepted, given how regularly they got debased when the latest palace or campaign got a little too expensive. Oh, not even 2 kupa, she mused. I hope it was a good meal. I've had worse, the thief shrugged. And taking the coppers had given him a reason to hang around Caballo Canal at night, letting him track the coming and goings of a Meng Xiaofan warehouse he had been sent by Abuela to rob. I expect you have, Shalini said, mood losing some of the humor. It seems to have hardened you in useful ways. It was his turn to cock an eyebrow at her. She was the one who had come to him, after all, so it was her who should make the pitch. Tredegar is being run by the infant zones, Shalini Goa told him. We both know Seagull's worse than a snake. A leopard society man through and through. I have never heard of them before, the thief admitted. I wouldn't expect a Sacramontan to have, she said. Izcali named their societies after animals from their homeland that embody traits they want to emulate, Tristan. But there are no leopards in the kingdom of Izcali. Tristan blinked in surprise. They're not a formal society, Shalini said. When forced to acknowledge their existence, the Grasshopper King will say they're charged with hunting criminals that flee outside Izcali borders. But what they really do is raid. She spat to the side. They go out with the candle priests, hit undefended villages out in the Shomeshwar or the republics, and bring them back like cattle, Delaney said. He grimaced in disgust, not faking it in the least. For the candles? She nodded, and he almost spat as she had. The kingdom of Izcali had been one of the strongest nations to emerge from the fall of the Second Empire, with fertile heartlands full of antediluvian wonders and its strong military bent. But its unification was a bloody business. Izcali was hardly alone in that, but what set the kingdom apart was that it was heavily dependent on First Empire lights to live, and almost all of them were on the ground instead of set in firmament. During the wars, many were damaged, which had unbalanced the intricate system of devices regulating light in Izcali. Entire regions had begun to go dark for weeks, months even, until the men now known as the Candle Priests found their solution. Feed the machines ether where they grew weak. Nowadays, Izcali claimed the era of bloody sacrifices, of murdering men on altars to keep the lights from burning out, was long past. That it had been much exaggerated anyhow, a very rare happenstance, and that advances in modern understanding of ether now made such savagery obsolete. There were kinder ways to keep the candles lit, needing no death and hardly any pain. Not stopped flower wars from erupting at Izcali borders, and such assurances from the Grasshopper Kings were as taken with a heavy grain of salt. With good reason, if Shalini spoke the truth about the Leopard Society. They're expendable, Ramayan said. If they get caught, become an embarrassment, they'll be called rogues or bandits and left to hang. Eagle came by that ugliness honestly, whatever else may be said of him. And there is much to be said, Tristan dryly replied. Figured you'd agree, Shalini grinned. You can see the same things I can. Ishan and I. We're your best bet. He smiled at her, saying nothing. That Yang comes with is another point in your favor, she acknowledged. But after the way Lady Saranda talked you up, I would have made an offer anyway. You, he said, and not Lord Ishan? I found that interesting. It's not a slight, Shalini assured him. It's just that he's a little scrambled at the moment. By now you'll have heard we ran into the Aravatan before you did, and that a contract was used to buy enough time for your crew to escape, Tristan said. Brand the Villasor had claimed that something stupefied the beast long enough for them to run away. It was contract work was not in doubt, and he had already suspected it was Ishan. But to hear it confirmed made the guess solid. There was some backlash, said. Hard not to, beating back a monster that large. But he's nearly through it, and we'll be back to form by tomorrow. He's just going to get confused easily until then. It's best for me to do the talking while he recovers. She paused. If your worry is that I make promises he won't keep, there is no need, Shalini reassured him. He's not insensate. It just takes a while for him to understand things. Everything I say with his approval. It was tempting to keep stringing her along, see if he could get any more information out of her, but that was greed talking. If he took too much before declining, he would be salting the grounds. Best to end this now and add a little sweetness so they remained on good terms. It is a tempting offer, he said. But, Shalini said. I won't be going into the maze tomorrow, Tristan said. Not with anyone. She drummed her fingers against the side of a pistol. Hedging your bets is not unreasonable, she grudgingly said, and we have had a longer to rest. But it was not the answer she had wanted, and perhaps even expected. So, now for the sweetness. Yang will not refuse if you ask him again, Tristan said. He does not want to wait. Shalini eyed him with interest. Is that what you two were speaking about? We were inclined to different strategies, Tristan shrugged. She would come out of it with another shot at a companion she had wanted more than he. But more important still, she would come out of their conversation with the feeling that she had won. Getting her hands on a source of tension between he and Yang was worth more than some talk about a suspected contract and idle conversation about the Leopard Society. Their conversation remained genial, and Tristan suspected she might have stayed longer if she had not caught sight of something. Brun was approaching Ishan Nair. Shalini made her excuses quickly after that, going to join them. That's another one for their crew, then, the thief thought. Brun was fit, loyal. He had backed Tredegar against Tupac, and came with no baggage attached. He was, in essence, a perfect replacement for Yaretsi. Like her, the blonde Sacramontan had made few waves and come out of the perils with a solid reputation. And that made Tristan uncomfortable, because Fortuna had called the god he was bound to loud. It did not necessarily follow that a contractor must be alike in nature with their contract did. He had little enough in common with Fortuna, but a loud god ought to be loud in their gifts. Yet, not a single whisper had spread of Brun's contract. The other man had navigated the game of alliances with a deft hand. He'd gotten in with the infant zones when the getting was good through the more influential of Isabel Ruesta's maids, then stuck closely to Tredegar, a woman who would bite her own arm off before raising a hand against a comrade, a category Brun had made certain to fit in. Now he was changing ship to the Ramayans, getting into a more stable crew, but carefully burning no bridges as he did. You are certain his god is the Loud One? Tristan murmured, feigning a yawn. Yes, Fortuna flatly replied, and he's being incredibly tasteless about it. She did not deign to elaborate further, and he knew better than to ask. There's something off about you, Brun, Tristan decided. No one genuinely following sentiment ended up making all the right choices all the time. The other man was running a game. Had to be. But which, and for what purpose? No answers would be found standing here, the thief knew, so he tore his gaze away. Whatever it was Brun wanted, his ambitions extended beyond survival, then it would be something to chase after later. Tristan had more pressing matters to worry about. 3 of them, to be exact. Franco was the most likely to have other offers, but Tristan still sought out Vanessa first. It was she whose expertise would determine whether his intentions were at all feasible. The old woman was sitting by herself in a corner, looking half asleep. The watch physician had her on poppy extract for the pain, but Tristan had checked the vials and the man was keeping the doses as low as he could. It was for the best. At her age, too strong a dose risked sending her into the kind of sleep she would not be waking from. Not much had been done about the shattered leg aside from cleaning it and binding it. But that was not laziness on the man's part. The orangutan had broken the limb beyond repair, bone shredding muscles and tendons as it shattered into pieces. Her kneecap was in 3 pieces, and the swelling made it impossible to operate and stem the internal bleeding. The physician had little choice but to recommend amputation. Either way, the watchman had told her, he won't ever be using that leg again. Vanessa had balked at that. Tristan had spent long enough as a cutter's assistant to know that was not an uncommon reaction, but it had been startlingly ferocious. She went hysterical for a time, needing to be restrained until she calmed, and had been subdued since. The one-eyed clockmaker was awake enough to notice when he came to sat by her side, though her face betrayed her exhaustion. Is it time for lunch? Vanessa asked. Not for a few hours yet, Tristan said. No one would be leaving anytime soon, anyhow. He thought some of the crews might set out to have a look at the shrines later this afternoon, but doubted anyone would begin the maze until tomorrow. First, they would want to recover and organize. She muttered. Sorry, my mind has been wandering. Common enough when taking poppy extract, he assured her. She nodded, looking thankful, as if he had not simply said the truth. A nice young woman from the watch is making me crutches, Vanessa told him. From an old ore, I believe. He said nothing. Anyhow, Vanessa continued, when they are finished, I will be able to have a look at this maze. It seems an interesting enough place. Sometimes, Tristan thought, the line between kindness and cruelty was thin as a breath. You know you won't be doing that, he quietly said. Perhaps not in one of these companies forming, Vanessa said, but surely, if you go into that maze, you will die. He interrupted as gently as he could, but his voice did not waver. It was a statement of fact, not a guess. Tristan had little heard of the tests these gods of the maze would set, but a one-eyed old woman with a broken leg would be as meat on the table. Vanessa's lips pursed. Then she looked away. He saw the emotions flicker across her worn face: frustration, anger, fear. At the end of the road, resignation. I am dead if I stay here, she finally said. The physician says I have 2 weeks at most, with the bleeding inside the leg. Much as he wanted to bring up the amputation again, it was not his place. Vanessa knew the costs of her decision. They had been made plain to her. If she had thought a slow death better than losing her leg, then it was her choice to make. There may be, Tristan said, another way. Her eye went to him, as if dragged by a hook. The hope he saw there burned, for there were no certainties in what he had to offer. Have you had a close look at the gate? He asked. I have not, she admitted. Then let us, Tristan said. I think you will find it interesting. He went about it methodically. First, took one of the spare benches near the kitchen, moved it in front of the gate, then went back for Vanessa. She had to lean on him all the while, most of her weight carried for her, but he got her to the bench and helped her down. She was barely paying attention by the time he did, sole eye flickering across the span of the iron gate, or, more precisely, the intricate mechanisms covering it. I cannot tell where it begins, she murmured. Oh, and some parts go into the gate. Tristan, see those? That will be etheric machinery, unless they have a steam engine on the other side that can run forever. Can you make any sense of it? He asked. The grids are the key, Vanessa told him, eye still on the gate. See how the gears around them are all derivative? Those metal plaques are the functional equivalent of levers, or perhaps more accurately, a combination lock. Moving them would have an effect, Tristan said. Vanessa nodded. Absolutely, she said. Mind you, there are a few distinguishing marks on them, and I do not see how anyone could easily get up there to activate them, but... She paused, enthusiasm slowly bleeding out of her as she turned to him. It is an interesting puzzle, Vanessa said, but it will not get either of us through the maze. I do not need a distraction, Tristan. Yes, you do, the thief thought. Else she would simply wither on the vine. Better yet that this was not a distraction at all. I disagree, Tristan murmured. I think the gate is exactly how we get through the maze. He gestured at the gate. The stone around it isn't the same as the forts, he said. And the scale of the structure that it is set in is absurd. While the stone the gate was set in a pillar, as it reached all the way to the distant ceiling of the cavern, it perhaps ought to be called a tower instead, for the sheer size of it. It was at least 100 feet long from side to side at the apex of the curve. So perhaps it is a First Empire ruin, Vanessa shrugged. That is no surprise given the great machinery above our heads. You're not paying attention to the right part, Kristen chided her. The pillar is in perfect shape. The old fort, however, is falling apart. The old woman stared at him, still uncomprehending. It was built later, not by the antediluvians, the thief said. And to guard what? A gate it would take 10 batteries of cannons to break through? I doubt it. And that leaves only the shrines, Vanessa said. The maze. You believe it also a recent addition? I do, Kristen agreed. And now that begs the question. What is that pillar for, then? Where does the gate lead? The clockmaker's lone eye dipped upwards at the pieces of gold slowly moving above them and giving out a ghostly golden glow. Even antediluvians needed to maintain their machines, Vanessa softly said. However fine the make, they fall apart eventually. And they would need a way to get up there, Kristen murmured. I believe we are looking at it. Vanessa hesitated. There is no guarantee that up there waits a path across the mountains, she said. Tristan could have said that even the antediluvians must have brought the pieces in from somewhere. That if the mazes of shrines were as recent and a god bound to the gate on the other side, then that very gate might be just as a recent an addition. But at the end of the day, she was right. There was no guarantee. It is a bet, Tristan admitted. He met her eyes squarely. But I believe in it enough to hold off on the maze, he said. Tristan was a rat. Would there be a stronger endorsement from the likes of him than putting his own fortunes on the line? His life was the sole thing of worth he owned. He said nothing more, letting the silence do the talking. The Sacramontan knew she would agree. For as Land had seen the truth was Vanessa did not truly want to die. She was resigned to it, perhaps. But if the choice was between the certain death of entering the maze as a lone cripple and rolling the dice on the gate, they both knew what she would choose. Tristan did not hurry her, letting her make the journey at her own pace until she was staring down at her ruin of a leg. There was a bitterness to the cast of her face that came to it more often these days. Well, Vanessa said, suppose there is not much left for me to lose. She sighed. Only the two of us? She asked. I want Franco as well, Steve immediately replied. And I have recruited outside helpers, Of course you have, the old woman tiredly smiled. You may count me as part of your cabal, then. I look forward to seeing what comes of it. He would have stayed longer, sitting with her, but she dismissed him. Wanted to look at the gate without distractions, she said. But if he wanted to be a dear, he could see about getting her ink and paper. That would have to wait, he decided, till he had spoken with Franco. The old professor was speaking with Lan when he found him, the blue-lipped dealer departing in a huff when she saw him. Franco cocked a brow at the thief, but Tristan rolled his eyes. I will ask no questions, then, the toothless old man drawled. What may I do for you, young man? Answer a few questions of mine, for one, he said. Had I known all along that all it took was the threat of grisly death to seek curiosity of my students, Franco smiled, I might have dabbled in it at Reeve. It might have shortened your career, the thief amusedly replied. Oh, murder is the least of the offenses one can get away with after tenure, Franco said. The old master of music once... but I am rambling again. Please do ask away. Tristan was going to come back and get that story about the master of music later, for it promised to be a most amusing one, but it would have to wait. I expect Lan was approaching you on behalf of Tupac Sequel, the thief leadingly said. The Iskali is most forthright about wanting cannon fodder, Franco said. The honesty of the offer is somewhat admirable. You don't seem to be biting at the bait, Tristan said. I thought it unwise before finding out what it is you are plotting, the professor candidly said. You do not seem to be joining up with anyone, which has me wondering what you do intend. There is a mystery in the bones of this trial, the thief said. I would dig it out. Franco considered him, sucking at his gums thoughtfully. The gate, he said. You want to open the gate. An endeavor in which a historian might be of some use, Tristan said. Especially one with fine ears. The reference to his contract was not particularly subtle, but neither was it too telling. He did want Franco on his side, if not strictly speaking, need him. The gate were easy to open, Watch already would have, having someone who could listen to what had gone on around the Great Pillar to parse out the parts of the puzzle they unearthed would be very useful indeed. It would starkly increase their odds of success, Tristan's opinion. An interesting offer, Franco finally said. It was not agreement, but neither was it a refusal. Unlike Vanessa, the old professor might potentially survive delving the maze. The risks were merely high, especially if he went in under the likes of Tupac. Think on it, Tristan simply said. I will not be going anywhere. His odds, he thought, were good. He would know by the end of the day what kind of crew it was he was working with. Marion only reappeared an hour later and avoided talking about where she had been. Of Beatrice, there was still no sign, which had him reconsidering how he could get eyes on Angharad Tredegar's crew. But Before that question was answered, there was another conversation he wanted to have. Not while people are around, Marion whispered, especially the watch. So they waited for night to meet, even as Tupac's crew and Ishan's went to have a look at the shrines. Vertigar, by contrast, seemed to be preparing her own for combat, putting them into formation, preparing weapons. An hour before the watch dimmed the lanterns, Franco approached him. If it leads nowhere, I'll have to turn to the maze, the old professor warned. I would not ask you otherwise, Tristan replied. Like that, there were only 2 stones left to turn over. Tristan considered night one of the more interesting lies people told themselves. It rested at a lively intersection between need, tradition, and control. Men must sleep. They could only stay awake for so long, therefore there must be an end to the day. A night where rest was allowed. Yet in most of Vesper, there was no natural boundary to delimit this. Only a few old wonders of the antediluvians underwriting such a cycle, in fact. It was thus in the hands of men to delimit night and day, to make them, and there the lie got interesting. Was a stretch of hours to be called night because your parents had called it such? Tradition had weight. It was true. If you were raised to be awake at certain hours and asleep at others, you might not question it. But those hours were not the same for everyone, were they? Half the miners of the trench lived during the night. Their little towns outside the wall of Sacramonte living askew in time from the rest of the city. And they were hardly the only ones. And it was not tradition that made that decision, or who would ever choose to work in the hell of the trench. It was those with power who had set the lines, the boundaries. It was they who decided when the lamp lights dimmed and when they burned. When men worked and when they rested. Abuela had once told him that about 40 years ago, the 6, the infant zones of infant zones, had tried to take an hour out of the night. They had wanted the docks and markets open longer, for those were the arteries of wealth in the city. And sooner or later, all of Sacramonte's wealth made its way into the hands of the 6th. They had not announced this or trumpeted it about, instead, sneaking it in as a natural thing. The lights had stayed on. The shifts been extended. The public clocks were tampered with or taken down for repairs, leaving people with no easy way to measure time by the eye. And the scheming few had thought that if this went on for long enough without notice, they could steal an entire hour from the many. It had not worked, Abuela had told him. People with little always noticed it when you took something from them. Somewhere around 3,000 people died in the Canario riots after the mob began storming noble mansions, and the Guardia answered by wheeling out organ guns and firing them into the crowd. Afterwards, smelling disaster, the six hung a dozen ringleaders after accusing them of having taken coin from the republics. It was all a foreign plot. And after the show of strength promptly backed down. The debacle with the stolen time was blamed on a single family, House Arlagon, which was exiled as the Six once more protected the rights of the people of Sacramonte. The hour went back. The clocks were all mysteriously fixed within a week, and all the world was pleased. And the infant zones quietly began building workers' towns outside the city wall, where criminals and the indebted would agree that day and night were whatever their betters said they were. What was the lesson of that story? Tristan had asked Abuela. There's no such thing as night, she'd said. Yet look at the storm of violence that was unleashed when men tried to change the span of it. An old lie is a powerful thing, Tristan. Learn to use them. The boy he had been when they first had the conversation, it had meant little. As he grew older, though, the words began to take meaning. It was not a secret or a trick Abuela had been trying to teach him, but a perspective. The things taken for granted, the foundations that Vesper rested on, should not be spared a skeptical eye. The chains that bound men most surely were those they never saw, never thought to strain against. Tristan was no Confederales to plot the bloody liberation of Sacramonte with a butcher's knife on his lap and a red circle sewn over his heart. But he would not suffer being owned. He learned to keep his eyes open, to sniff out the lies. And this trial of ruins, it reeked. Enough that it was forcing him to look back at the entire dominion of lost things and wonder what it was that the Watch truly wanted with this place. He'd come here treading on a foundation of certainty. Black Cloaks used the trials to bring in skilled but irregular recruits while fattening their pockets by letting the nobles use them as proving grounds. Perhaps a little posturing thrown in as well. An unspoken reminder that at the end of the trials, the infant zones used to set themselves above one another. All that the victors qualified to be was the rank and file of the Watch. Only the numbers didn't add up. Even if Tristan was willing to dismiss the way trial takers were chosen, and he wasn't, not when he had to wonder if the Black Cloaks would actually want half of the people who'd paid to get on the Bluebell. There was a larger discrepancy behind it all. Coin. How many infant zones, how many red game candidates were sent every year? Possibly enough to keep an old cog like the Bluebell and the other ship the first wave had taken afloat. Their crews paid, but not much more than that. Then the watch would have to pay and feed the garrison on the Dominion, to supply and maintain its forts, defend them against the cultists of the Red Eye. In the most generous of suppositions, if 100 people took to the Dominion every year, and half of those survived to become watch, very generous supposition, then after the losses to sickness, gods, and cultists were subtracted, the Black Cloaks wouldn't be getting more than a dozen net recruits or so. And for those dozen recruits, they'd be drenching their ledger in red. He had thought his explained the seeds and trade goods he and Marion had figured out at the docks. The watch was trying to get some gold out of this place and perhaps lower its casualties with bribes. But now here they got to the trial of ruins. A horror of dead and dying gods under a First Empire aether machine that had to be worth a small city. Why hadn't they stripped that thing and sold it to make a fortune? If they feared the gods of the maze enough to threaten the execution of anyone contracting with one without reporting it, why not fill this place to the brim with black powder and light a fuse? No, there was something going on here beyond the watch, ruining a seemingly sloppy recruitment operation. Instead of running around in the maze with the rest of them, Tristan Nabrascal was going to find out what it was the Black Cloaks knew and the rest of them didn't. The first step to that, in an unusual turn, was not to be all that difficult. There was only one person who knew more about these trials than she should. They were already set to talk. Marion had promised, in the heat of the moment when the Erraticans seemed set to kill them. And that they were to have a conversation. It was one best kept away from prying eyes, she had claimed, though Tristan used an old lie in the very simplest of ways. They waited until night made everyone go to sleep. Not every trick had to be done bold or brilliant. They met in one of the broken bastions under a ceiling half collapsed, surrounded by loose masonry. The Black Cloaks didn't patrol. Not really. They kept watch from atop the walls and sometimes went around the fortress to eye the courtyard, but they had no interest in the nooks and crannies of the old fort. They're not afraid of animals or lemures, Tristan decided. Given Lieutenant Wen's enthusiastic oration about gods eating each other, he suspected there might not be any around. Marion came in but a few heartbeats after him, hand on the knife at her side as her blue eyes scanned the dark. pushed off of the stone he'd been leaning against. He pushed off of the stone he'd been leaning against, passing under the broken ceiling and the rays of gold pouring down it. Her shoulder relaxed. You know, Marion said, if someone else had asked me into a dark corner where everyone went to sleep, I might have assumed they had intentions. He cocked an eyebrow. But not me. She rolled her eyes. I'm not blind, Tristan, she said. You're about as interested in bed sport as I am in collecting butterflies. A traditional hobby, if largely pointless, he said. He had not specified which she was talking about, which, by the look of her grin, she had absolutely noticed. Much as he disliked sobering the mood after such a pleasant start, he had not come here for the pleasure of her company. Seeing the change in his expression, Marion's own shed the mirth. And now I pay my dues, yes? She said. I would not dig into your personal secrets, Tristan said, but I have questions and you have answers. She dismissed his words with a wave. I made my choice out on the plains and will not walk it back now, Marion said. There are limits to what I may speak of, but within them I will not balk. You said, Tristan murmured, that this year was not like the others, that some of us were marked for more than simply joining the watch. Marion slowly nodded. She was considering her words. Navigating promises? Perhaps. And ultimately, it was with a question she answered. What strikes you as strange about the Bluebell passenger? He cocked his head to the side. He'd given that subject much thought now that he had time to spare and more information to chew on. You and Leander Galatas could both use signs, he said, and not the way some street witch would. The usual potions and curses. Real kind of sign. Those navigators use. That is more than passing rain. Sorry, that is more than passing bear. He nodded encouragingly. There are much too many people with contracts, he added after a moment. It seems like at least half the foreigners have one. Zenzele Duma did. Shan Nair. Same was likely true of Tupac Sequel. Tristan sincerely doubted that even a mirror dancer could be as quick as Angharad Tredegar without a little help. Throw in Song, Acanthe Fos, Isabel Ruesta, Brune, and Franco. Then on top of that, the rumor that Riemann Serdan had one as well. The numbers were troubling. Even if no one else was hiding a contract, which he had doubts about, then out of the 33 people on the Bluebell, there had been at least 12 with contracts, counting himself and Marzella. It was a staggering number, even for individuals aiming to enter the watch. Someone might well go their entire life without needing that many contractors, much less all of them in the same room. All the recommended are being evaluated to see if they qualify for special enrollment, Marion told him. Yourself included. Special enrollment? He pressed. I cannot speak about it, he admitted. I skirt the edge of breaking an agreement by even telling you this much. As he thought, her foreknowledge had come with strings. It only reinforced that he was speaking to the right person to find the thread he must pull at, because the most likely suspect for Marion's interlocutor was the watch, or at least a member of it. You knew about this before coming here, he decided, studying her face. What is that makes this particular year different from the others? Timing, quietly said. An opportunity that will not come twice. Kristen passed a hand through his hair, frustrated at how vague she was, but half sure it was not on purpose. She had called it an agreement. What stilled her tongue? That implied someone on the other end of the bargain. It was not an oath, but a bargain struck with another. Someone who might care if she broke the term. The Cryptea said. The masks. You said they wanted something. Do you know what it is? There were 100 named for the agents of Cryptea. The most secretive of the watch. Many rumors were, or what their purpose might be. Spies and assassins, most said, though others claimed it was the watchmen themselves they watched over. Whatever the truth, their reputation for ruthlessness and secrecy was no lie. It might not be a good thing at all that he had somehow drawn their eye. Marion studied him for a long moment, blue eyes searching, before she let out a startled breath. So you really don't know, she quietly said. It's not something they want, Tristan. It's you. They are the circle that recommended you. Did that mean everyone who'd been recommended had? No, that wasn't as important as the fact that for some reason it apparently caught the eyes of the freaking masks. You're sure? He got out. Marion leaned forward, openly worried. Tristan, the other recommended all had a name with them, said. The person who gave the recommendation. All except you. Yours was just a wax seal with the symbol of the Cryptea. I don't know how high up their ranks you must be to be able to use that, but it's not low. She grimaced. You're telling me you have no idea who did this? I know who arranged for me to have a place on the Bluebell, he admitted, but I could never be sure she was part of the watch. She has never claimed so, and I have never seen her in a black cloak. How likely was Abuela to put one of those on if she was truly part of the Cryptea? The rest of the watch announced themselves, black cloaks like a banner reminding everyone of what they stood for. The masks were spies. The last thing they would want was to be announced. It could be she knows someone in the Cryptea, Marion said, but she sounded doubtful. Maybe she called in an old favor. Old was the right word, for Abuela was at least nearing 70. For all that, she remained spry. Could be retired, he thought. Could masks retire? He did not know. Kristen could feel his mind beginning to go in circles, looking away at all the many unknowns he had no way to shed light on. So he forced himself to keep speaking. Tell me about Song Ren. It was half a guess, come of details he had noticed in that racing debate about who should get lynched for June's murder. The rueful surprise on her face told him he'd struck true. I met her before the trials, Marion said. She is here for the same reason I am. And that is what? He asked, knowing the answer he would get. Not something I can speak about without breaking my agreement, she replied. Ah, the special enrollment, he thought. That was the heart of the secret, for both she and Song. But, in a way, that was a disappointment, for that was a temporary addition to the greater secret of the Dominion of Lost Things. It would not help him unearth the truth of this place. How much do you really know about these trials? He quietly asked. More than I should, Marion said, then grimaced. Less than you likely think. I can tell you that most people who contract with a maze god will get executed. I was specifically warned against it, and that the sanctuary past the ruins is a fort on the other side of the mountains. He raised an eyebrow, inviting her to continue. My source was vague on the trial of grass, she admitted, but it is meant to rid the watch of the restless and trouble cases. Tristan bit at his thumb, thoughtful. First, the relative shallowness of what she had just said, juxtaposed with the emphasis made on certain detail. If he had to bet, someone with full information had given her a broad outline and emphasized dangers that might get her killed. Has to be the watch, he thought. Infant Zones wouldn't know anything about the third trial. Or care about keeping whatever its purpose was intact. The easy guess for why the information she'd been given was vague. Good enough to help craft strategy, but not much beyond that. Second, he was now even more certain that the trial of ruins was the heart of this entire enterprise. Weeding out the restless and the trouble cases, that sounded like filtering tacked on at the end of the road. So that the Black Cloaks would not be stuck with anyone they didn't truly want to enter their rank. Which means the parts that matter are here and within the trial of line, he thought. You're not interested in the maze at all, are you? Marion suddenly said. I thought you might be just leveraging your reputation, holding out for a better offer by one of the groups, but It's not them your eye is on. I will have to go into the maze eventually, Tristan acknowledged. If nothing else, it would be the most expedient way to get rid of Cosme, Flora, and Cerdans. He was not worried about being able to join later, given that after casualties begin to amount, all the diving crews would be looking for fresh blood. It would not make him light, but what did he care for that? Still, it was through the gate he intended to pass this puzzle, and not the one the watch had told him to. Yet, keeping my attention on it strikes me as missing the canal for the barge, he continued. This place exists for a reason. This game is not it. That will be watch business, he warned him. Mine as well, so long as the watch demands I take part in this trial, Tristan replied. Marian paced away, crossing her arms when she came to a halt. Light poured down from behind, gilding her silhouette. The shadows obscured the lay of her face. You are not going to let this go. Neither of them pretended that had been a question, though shadows he met from blinking eye with his own, never blinking. Oh, interesting sentence structure. Neither of them had pretended that had been a question, though the shadows he had her eyes with his own. Through the shadows, he met her eyes with his own, never blinking. That makes a lot more sense. Are you? He challenged. What did the warnings help when the Arabitan hunted us? You are in the same game as the rest of us, Marian. Their secrets are just as likely to get you killed. For a long moment they remained that way, till finally she jerked her head to the side. There's another Aether machine around, Marian told him. It can be used to look at parts of the island on great panels of gold. It's how they make their reports, though supposedly there are limitations. We will have to be careful. She had said, and like that, a weight left his shoulders. Marian stepped away from the light, the gold sliding off her dress. It left the ghostly pit between them, painting the rubble. He saw the hesitation on her face, but said nothing, letting her come to the decision to speak in her own time. Your surname, Marian said. You keep it hidden for a reason. It was, he thought, gently done of her. If he simply answered yes, the conversation would end there. But the door was opened if he wanted to say more. And it was tempting to simply put an end to it, but the thief held back on that and she had, the day before their group tried the bridge, implied she might just sorry about that. Implied she might help him with his revenge. Tristan had just decided to dig at the watch's secrets because they might get him killed, which would make the hypocrisy of keeping Marian in the dark here, a large one to swallow. Not so much he could not, but he found he did not want to. Not after she had told him, even if those secrets were not her own. I cannot be certain, Tristan said, but I believe Cosme of Flor might recognize the name Averskull. Is it common? Marion asked. Only somewhat, he said. But while we only met a handful at times when I was a child, he knew my father. Only somewhat, he said. But while we only met a handful of times when I was a child, he knew my father for 2 years. The blue-eyed woman slowly nodded, did not ask, which, perversely enough, made him want to say more. He is at the bottom of my list for a reason, Tristan murmured. He pulled the trigger in the end, but they'd killed my father long before that. Oh, Sir Don, she said. He nodded. Sacramonte is, he began, halted. It was hard to explain to someone not of the city. We do not have a king, he said. 6, they're not different from other houses in principle. Most of their privileges are ceremonial. Yet it is the 6 who rule us, have for as long as anyone can remember. Every noble house in Sacramonte craves to sit where they sit. He passed a hand through his hair. Only a few came close, he said. And the Cerdan were one of them. They can't seem to break in. Their blood is the right amount of old. They own enough land and make enough coin, but they don't have the something that lets the 6 be on top. Like the contracts for the Arquier, or the Veracity Chambers for the Calzada. He thinly smiled. So they've been trying to... No, he thinly smiled. And so they've been trying to bridge the gap, he said. Quietly, so the others don't notice. But quiet, just about the only line they drew in the sand. What did they do? Tristan quietly asked. He looked away, jaw clenching, remembering how father had seemed so grateful when Cosme pulled the trigger. Too much for me to forgive, he said. He left it at that. Marion snuck back ahead at his suggestion, because Tristan was not yet done with the night. It was not back to his bedroll he went, but instead into the shadows of the old fort. And there, patiently waiting as he watched the movements of the patrols, found out 2 things of some import. The first was Beatrice, coming out of the watch barracks and taking a short walk around the courtyard with an escort before returning within. Though she had a watchman with her, she did not seem a prisoner. Protection, Tristan thought. Unless he was quite wrong, Beatrice had withdrawn from the trials and no one else yet knew of it. The second came later, after he risked getting closer to the bastion with the astronomy equipment. It did not seem to be getting used, to his confusion, till his eye was drawn by a flash of lantern light. The bastion went slightly around the side of the great pillar, but it was high above that he saw the light, an opening in the stone, from which someone was lowered, a rope ladder. He had just found the other lieutenant in command of the garrison, Kristen decided, and why Lieutenant Wen had been so convinced none of them would see her. With her, he had found his first clue. And with that, we're going to leave the journey there for now. Hope you found a moment of solace. Thank you for being here, and take care. Until next time.